where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Donald Trump's second term has redrawn the map of American power, not through consensus, but through command. From the UN rostrum to the Oval Office, he has fused populist defiance with executive dominance, bending diplomacy, trade, and war policy to his will. Admirers call it decisive leadership. Critics see the architecture of an elected autocracy. Either way, Trump has recast Washington's role in the world, from global anchor to unpredictable actor, leaving allies wary, rivals emboldened, and the rules of engagement rewritten. In the process, he has transformed the presidency itself from an institution of restraint into a stage for personal rule. To discuss all this, joining us now is Ambassador John Bolton. John Bolton is an American attorney, diplomat, Republican consultant, and political commentator. He served as the 26th United States National Security Advisor to US President Donald Trump from 2018 to 2019, and as the 25th United States Ambassador to the United Nations from 2005 to 2006. Today, he discusses Donald Trump's evolving approach to global leadership, from his attacks on multilateralism and claims of ending 8 unendable wars to his renewed diplomacy with Putin, China, and the Middle East. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Bolton, and for your time. My first question to you is, of course, at the United Nations, Donald Trump slammed multilateralism and praised his own war-ending record. Is that a recalibrated form of US leadership or a slide back into isolation that leaves allies uneasy?
Well, I think it was a typical Trump speech in the sense that it was all about Donald Trump. And I don't think it necessarily carries any philosophical overview. I mean, I think it's a reflection of what was on his mind at the time. I think that it's been the view of many Americans for a long time that the UN's needed pretty fundamental reform. That hasn't happened. But, it's just not indicative of a Trump philosophy, because there is no philosophy there. It was mostly about what he did right and what everybody else did wrong, including particularly the UN.
Now, Ambassador Bolton, in terms of the conflict in Europe, the Ukraine war, Trump has cancelled his upcoming summit in Budapest with Vladimir Putin, but now he claims that Ukraine can reclaim all its territory after earlier hinting at concessions. Does this mark an evolution in his negotiating style, or simply another bout of inconsistency?
Well, Trump sees state-to-state relations as embodied in the personal relationships between the leaders. So he thinks he's friends with Vladimir Putin, for example, then he would say U.S.-Russia state-to-state relationships are good, which is a vast oversimplification. But basically what Trump thought was that his friend Vladimir would help deliver a settlement to the crisis in Ukraine. He said during the campaign he would do it in 24 hours. Nobody believed that, but he hasn't done it in 9 months. And I think he's clearly disappointed with Putin. But Putin still can work the old KGB training on Trump, as he demonstrated during the recent phone call that people thought might lead to a summit in Hungary. But Trump also has a short attention span. So when he realized that things weren't going as he hoped for, he wasn't going to get another productive meeting with Putin, he turned back to the idea that he was going to impose sanctions on Russia, which is something he could have done 9 months ago. In fact, the Biden administration could have done them. Just as the EU recently imposed its 19th sanctions package on Russia, one could ask, why didn't they do all that in 2022? Why did it take 19 separate decisions? But at the same time, Trump said no tomahawks for Ukraine. Now, the sanctions, I'm glad he made that decision. I wish it had been made earlier. I hope they're enforced vigorously. They will have an effect on Russia's ability to finance the war, but they may not be as consequential as giving the Ukrainians tomahawks. And I think when you put that together, it just shows there's no strategic coherence to what Trump is doing. It's how he feels on a given day, and that's the outcome you're seeing.
Now let's move on to more of Trump's negotiating tactics. He has constantly cited the use of tariffs as an effective tool for peacemaking in his efforts. What are your assessments on this style of negotiations?
Well, I think tariffs can be an important part of the sort of asymmetric warfare that we've seen around the world. In the case of the United States, though, we'll see what the Supreme Court says, I think, fairly shortly about Trump's tariff authority. But normally tariffs are imposed by Congress as part of the taxing authority. If that's true, that significantly restrains the president's ability to use tariffs as a policy tool. And there's an argument for cases when tariffs can be important, when you're dealing with a bad actor like China, for example, but not necessarily when you're dealing with others, which would have to suffer kind of irrational swings in tariffs for no particular reason. I don't rule tariffs out as a matter of principle, but I think there are plenty of other things in the arsenal of sticks and carrots that the U.S. and other countries can use that are much more appropriate than tariffs in general terms.
Now, Ambassador, as Trump promotes peace initiatives while keeping tariffs and trade fights alive, particularly the revived dispute with China over soy exports, do you see a coherent grand strategy? Or does his blend of coercion and diplomacy erode US leverage?
Well, Trump has no philosophy. He has no national security grand strategy. He doesn't even really do policy the way we normally understand that term. His advisors have often themselves described his approach as transactional, episodic, ad hoc. When he was running the Trump Organization, a real estate development firm, he would never make a daily schedule. He'd come in every day and say, well, let's see what happens today. And that's the way he's running the Oval Office. It may work in Manhattan real estate. It doesn't work in national security. And I think the erratic, uncertain nature of the way he makes his decisions, it may be disruptive in a sense, but disruptive can have both good and negative consequences. And I think it's fine to disrupt your adversaries, keep them guessing, leave them wondering what you're going to do next. But disrupting your allies weakens alliances that are often critical in dealing with just those adversaries. So because Trump is not doing what his supporters say, which is playing a complex game of three-dimensional chess, he's playing one move at a time, and that's it. Every move is a new game. And as long as he continues to perform that way, and there's every reason to think that he will, it's going to leave people guessing. And I think the recent back and forth over both Iran and the Ring of Fire strategy against Israel on the one hand, and the Russia-Ukraine war on the other, are pretty graphic demonstrations of how Trump's style can get in the way of what he says his substantive goals are.
Now let's talk about Donald Trump's latest achievement, the self-proclaimed eighth war that he has solved. Trump's new Board of Peace and Gaza Peace push. It suggests an appetite for global mediation. Do you see this as a genuine strategic shift in Middle East policy or another optics-driven effort to dominate the headlines?
Well, I think it's more the latter than the former. I think he views this as a real estate deal, and he's now the chairman of the board of a big real estate company called Gaza Development, Inc., or something like that. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, honestly. I think the release of the hostages was a significant accomplishment, obviously, particularly for Israel. But the next critical step is the demilitarization of Hamas. And based on what they're doing in Gaza right now, I don't really see any evidence that Hamas itself is prepared for demilitarization. And if that step is not completed successfully, because I think it's foundational to everything that follows from it, I'm not sure that the peace plan has a much longer lifespan at this point.
And of course, staying on that topic, what is your assessment of Donald Trump's relationship with Israel? Although, of course, the Israeli Prime Minister has called him the best friend that Israel has ever had in the White House, there seems to have been some tension there, especially in the background. What are your thoughts on the future of that relationship?
Well, I think his relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu has always been fraught and a bit tense. He's never seen Bibi Netanyahu as a friend as he has Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin or even Kim Jong-un of North Korea. I think it's the stress that you're seeing is that he doesn't believe the Israelis are following his orders. That's what he thinks their job is. And this touches on a very complex part of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, whether Israel is a client state of the U.S. Or whether they're just really treated like a satellite country. And Trump's view is everybody works for him, and he wants people to carry out his orders, which the Israelis at this point seem not inclined to do. I think for good reason, because they don't see that Hamas is doing its end of the bargain of the Trump peace plan.
Now, moving on, Trump has often relied on personal rapport with leaders from Kim Jong-un to Putin. Is that approach sustainable, or does it risk policy being dictated by ego rather than institutions?
Well, I think there's certainly a role for personal relations in international affairs, as in everything else. But when you're dealing, especially with authoritarian leaders like Putin and Xi and Kim, they're operating not on the basis of personal feelings or emotions or anything else. They're operating on the basis of their very clear visions of what their national interests are. And when you put Putin in a room with Trump as an example, this is not a fair fight. I mean, Trump is looking to have a good personal relationship with Putin, and Putin's looking to take him to the cleaners. And that's basically what happened at the Alaska summit, and to an extent in their recent phone call. Now, that doesn't mean it always works for Putin. I think the sanctions that we discussed a moment ago are going to have a serious negative effect on Russia's economy. But it also doesn't mean that it's the end of the friendship from Trump's point of view, and Putin may well now be thinking, how do I get him back? So this has a kind of Groundhog Day effect to it, as you think something has been resolved and we've moved on to something else. But for Trump, it's always the same thing. Will his friend Vladimir accommodate him?
Now, next, turning to Latin American tensions, particularly with Venezuela. They're back after sanctions and Caracas's crackdown on dissent. How do you see the administration handling that standoff, and what message does it send about their tolerance for authoritarian partners?
Well, it was a very clear policy of Trump in the first term to overthrow the Maduro dictatorship and reinstitute constitutional government in Venezuela under Juan Guaido, whom we recognized, as did almost all other Western Hemisphere countries and many in Europe, recognized as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Now, that effort obviously failed. The opposition faced in 2025, as they did in 2018, an election that Maduro stole. There wasn't any opposing point of view to that. It was very clear what happened. But there's still the opposition, notwithstanding that Mrs. Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts against the Maduro regime. I continue to believe that for the security of the Western Hemisphere and certainly for the people of Venezuela, overthrowing Maduro is the only answer. Unless we get to that point, the Venezuelans will suffer and the hemisphere will be in danger of more infiltration by Russia, by China, even by Iran. The question is, does Trump now have a coherent strategy to help make that happen? And obviously, we wouldn't necessarily know if it wouldn't be made public in that sense. But from the objective evidence we see, it looks to me more like grandstanding for news headlines, blowing drug smuggler boats out of the water, flying the B-2, according to the Wall Street Journal, near the coast of Venezuela, which the Pentagon has now denied. But all these steps that have been leaked out to the newspapers are interesting, but not necessarily indicative of a real strategy to help the opposition overthrow the Maduro regime. So I worry that Trump's short attention span may be getting in the way again of what he says his real objectives are.
Now let's move to some domestic issues now. Trump's use of federal troops in Democrat-led cities has drawn heavy criticism. Does that domestic instinct, force first, compromise later, mirror his foreign policy logic? And what does it reveal about his leadership style?
Well, I think he likes to be the center of everything. And so him ordering the federalization of state National Guard units being sent into large urban areas makes him the center of attention. So that accomplishes that objective. In most of these cities, I think the residents would say we need better law enforcement. And for most Americans, I think overwhelmingly they'd say they favor greater law enforcement. But sending the National Guard in isn't going to achieve that. They're not there permanently. They're not typically resident in the cities where they're being sent. They haven't been trained in law enforcement. And in fact, it flies in the face of what a conservative president should believe, which is federalism, which is let the governments closest to the people, first the city governments, then the state governments, let them handle these kinds of matters, with the federal government only coming in as a last resort. So it's in many respects, it's the wrong policy, and it's wrong most of all because we have always tried to separate the military from law enforcement. There are legitimate law enforcement agencies to do that. The military is something else, except in the most extraordinary circumstances. So I don't think there's much here other than political theater involved. I don't think it really addresses the crime problem that many major cities have. But that's more for the local residents. If they don't summon up the political will to say we want to change, you get the government you vote for.
Now, with the No King's March gaining traction among critics who say Trump is centralizing power, do you see a genuine shift in US civic sentiment, or just another wave of political theatre in a polarized age?
Well, I think it's too soon to tell. I'm certainly glad liberals and Democrats recognize that the century of centralizing power in the federal government in Washington may not have been entirely the wisest thing to do, because when you make the national government the overriding authority, you're putting more power into the hands of the president, meaning into the hands of Donald Trump. People should remember the old adage, the government that is big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take everything you have. That's why conservatives have long argued that governmental functions should be handled closer to the people, who are more aware of exactly what they need from the government. So if there is an awakening to the virtues of decentralizing power after the Trump second term is over, I certainly think as a philosophical matter for the country, that's very positive.
Ambassador Bolton, pleasure having you on Focal Length.